mind, what, when it came to losing weight or gaining weight, like what type of training did you think you had to do to accomplish, said aim?
I was so clueless, but I think I started with what a lot of people thought. Like you go in, you burn a lot of calories doing like cardio, you sweat really hard. So I think trying to get back to that mindset freshman year of college, I'm sure I started just going in and doing a bunch of cardio before I even thought of doing any sort of weightlifting.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's fairly common too. Why do you think that may have been?
I think it might just be a visual thing. Like if you don't know what you're doing, you can observe people, or like endurance athletes, you can observe people on cardio machines going crazy, like sweating a lot, and you make the incorrect inference that they're burning more calories and working harder than someone you may see weightlifting or on machines who is not sweating or who has a casual tempo or isn't even necessarily lifting heavy. So not knowing anything about fitness or health or weightlifting or training, I think I just made some like visual assumptions.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a common misnomer, right? That like, if you're sweating super hard, you must be the hardest worker in the room. And like, we know that there's much more complexity to that reality. So it's not just, one causative relationship between the two things. It can be indicative of exertion for some people, but not as much for others, so that's a common misnomer. I think another reason that people gravitate towards cardio as a first form of working out, one reason is there's a low barrier to entry. The machines are very easy to use. So if you're just starting out, you don't have a lot of instruction. And then I think generally what happens for women is there's a misnomer that because you lift weights, you may get bulky, and which is not correct. And so they're driven away from lifting weights when in fact that may actually be beneficial to their aims. So I think those are a few of the reasons that people gravitate towards the cardio machines. And then for people that are more informed, they understand that weight loss is a lot about calories in, calories out. And therefore, if they burn more calories, they can eat more or not have to eat as few calories. So I think those are some of the common draws for people. But I wanted to dive into why, especially, and I know that this is not a good sustainable strategy, and also not really going to get people what they want, because people don't want to just lose weight. They want to lose body fat. And in losing body fat, they want to look lean, which requires them to have lean muscle mass, right? And so we don't want to cannibalize that in the pursuit of weight loss, right? So let me introduce us to a new way of thinking, and that is using resistance training for fat loss or weight loss, right? So there's a few reasons that this is beneficial, right? Obviously, muscle mass is what we see when we see people that are lean, like our friend here doing this dumbbell row, who's significantly lean. He has very low body fat in this picture. So you need underlying musculature in order to, show off if your goal is aesthetic. There's that term that gets thrown around, skinny fat, which isn't necessarily the best term to use, but people tend to think of that as when you lose weight, but then you don't really have too much muscle definition. So that's generally just a lack of overall muscle. So one reason that we want to make sure when we're in a calorie deficit or we're eating less than we need, trying to lose weight, the reason that we want to make sure that we are resistance training is that it protects our lean muscle tissue during that fat loss phase, right? So any muscle that you currently have, it's going to help prevent you from losing that while you lose weight. So here's a question for you. Is it possible to lose body fat without losing muscle?
Is it possible? Aren't you always losing? I mean, I think there's ways, hopefully you can train the body to prioritize dropping body fat first. But I don't know if it's like possible to always prevent muscle loss as much as getting it in the ratio. Say like, 90% of what you're burning is fat and only 10% is muscle. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's not possible to lose no muscle, but the way that you train, the way that you eat can help prevent you from losing a significant portion of it from muscle, right? And waste out muscle as you go through. So the goal is to protect as much of that muscle tissue as possible as you lose weight. So resistance training as well as proper diet are going to help you accomplish that. Now, another thing that's important to note is that muscle is more metabolically expensive than body fat, meaning that the more muscle you have, the higher your resting metabolism will be, the more food that you need and the more food that you can eat in the calorie deficit. So if you're already a more muscular individual, you've built an underlying muscle mass, it's going to be easier for you to lose weight during a fat loss phase than someone that doesn't have that underlying muscle, which is great, right? So you get that double benefit through there as well. So one way that people like to think of it, they're like, hey, can I go out and do a bunch of, cardio to burn those calories? Well, you could actually sit on your couch, and because you're more muscular, your resting metabolism is going to be higher. So having more muscle is equivalent to doing extra cardio for a person that has less muscle mass. So unforeseen benefit for a lot of people there, right? Have you heard of the term EPOC before?
I have not.
So EPOC is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, which is, the term afterburn is sometimes used. So it's the boost to your metabolic rate post-exercise, right? Like how juiced up your metabolism got from the exertion that you put out. And it's been shown that resistance training actually creates a higher post-training effect to the metabolism than steady state cardio at a moderate aerobic heart rate.
Which is
And
super
then
cool.
like that. Yeah, so you're actually like, you're able to continue to burn calories more efficiently after you exercise with weights doing resistance training than doing the cardio session as well. So that's something you may not necessarily see or be exposed to, but it's something that's going on in, inside your body as well. The other benefit that's super interesting to people is the increase in pro-metabolic hormones like growth hormone, testosterone, and also a proper leveling of the hormone cortisol. So as we know, just like our friend in this picture right here, lifting heavy weights promotes increases in growth hormone and testosterone, which are called anabolic hormones, meaning they're associated with the growth of muscle tissue, right? Or expansion of muscle tissue in the body, versus excessive cortisol levels lead to body fat storage and things like that. So lifting weights increases the hormones that are beneficial to fat loss and muscle gain, and then decreases or balances the levels of hormones that may not be as beneficial to fat loss or muscle gain as well. Have you heard some of this information before?
Not the EPOC. I have heard one of the benefits of having more lean muscle mass is that like hormonal boost in terms of like having a good metabolism.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that a lot of people aren't thinking about what's happening after training. They're just thinking about the amount of calories burned within the training session. But it's very clear from the evidence that the resistance training, not only are you going to burn some calories, obviously you're exerting work, but you may not burn as many during the training session, but the impact afterwards is going to be more beneficial than had you just gone and run on the treadmill for an hour or something like that. Right. So people want it to be this balanced math equation where they're controlling all the calories out within that training session, but it's more complex like that. And it's better to focus on something that has an after effect as well, like that.
Right. And this could be like a fitness urban legend, but I've heard, I guess, that, and again, anyone can look however they choose to look, and that's great in any given sport, but that male endurance athletes or someone that just jogs and jogs, that's all they do, has lower levels of T, or there's some sort of testosterone estrogen relationship. So they have very lean bodies. None of the muscle mass is bulky. I don't know if that's part of this process or something.
Yeah, I mean, it could be evidence. I mean, if someone's well rested and they're active and they're eating well, like their testosterone levels are pretty well regulated, most likely. I don't know specifically if you took like a balanced, like not an overtrained runner, but like a balanced runner, and then like a balanced weightlifter that was obviously drug free, if they had comparable testosterone levels. It would be interesting. I mean, obviously there's individual variability too, so it'd have to be like a larger study of said participants and across time to get averages. But that would be interesting. I'm not 100% sure. I think that when people are overtrained, regardless of the sport, you'll see a dip in testosterone levels when they're not recovering properly.
Yeah,
that's definitely for sure. like that. So that's why we, resistance training doesn't get sort of it. Obviously, for building muscle, people pay attention to it or getting stronger. But when it comes to fat loss, it's also should be the go-to training modality. And we'll talk about how much of your training program it should be incorporated in. And as we were talking about, when it comes to cardio, we want to watch out for these chronic cardio sessions because of a few reasons. Now, chronic cardio is something where you're doing steady state cardio. So like 30 minutes plus of just nonstop at the same effort, right? Moderate pace, you're not going super hard, you're not going super easy, but right in the middle of those aerobic zones, maybe like a 2 or a 3. And the reasons we want to avoid this, one, you're eventually going to have a catabolic effect or a muscle wasting effect if you're not also doing resistance training and eating adequate protein. Another reason is that people are essentially trying to balance the calorie input and output scale. So they use it as an excuse to go out and eat bad food. Have you ever heard of anyone doing that?
I think a lot of pop culture or even comics, I remember as a kid, like comic strip comics is about like, I had that cheesecake. Now I gotta go get on the treadmill for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this, it's not very well thought out, but this sort of like one-to-one, I have to overcompensate with just a bunch of cardio for hours to justify like a cookie. And it's not a well-rounded, like scientific approach taken into account.
Yes, absolutely. And there's other factors involved, right? And like, from the calorie counters on the cardio machines are not necessarily very accurate, but just like the visual of like, oh my God, it took that long to burn 100 calories and I could eat it in so much faster. I think maybe that's a good reminder to people to moderate, but you can always out eat the amount that you can work out, especially if you're a busy person, you can't spend days and days working out or hours within the day. So it's better to regulate that nutrition and focus on more balanced training as well. The other thing is, like we talked about, like if you are just doing tons of chronic cardio, you're going to suppress some of the hormones that are beneficial to your muscle maintenance in that deficit. And you're also going to increase cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which leads to deposits of body fat and things like that. So you want to make sure that you're not overtraining and especially not overdoing cardio. And to that point as well, you're doing the same thing. Say you're just running tens of miles a day, you're going to end up with overuse injuries from just doing that same training modality over and over again, instead of providing variability into the training effect. So it's like if you're doing different types of exercises, weightlifting, mixing in some HIIT cardio versus just going for long runs every day, that variety is going to prevent you from getting those overuse injuries as well. So, important to make sure that, we're always mixing up our training, but especially when it comes to fat loss there. The other reason is cardio gets boring, as you know, right?
Oh yeah, especially flat, steady state. Stairmaster level 4 for 30 minutes. Yeah.
Even if you throw some Netflix on, it catches up to you, right?
Yes. And then you're like less excited in it, less excited doing it. Or if you're just watching TV, I think you're even more checked out versus like, oh, I'm going to try some intervals even within the steady state. But I guess,
Yeah. So it's kind of just making sure that you have something that's going to be intriguing or interesting enough for you to stick with training wise. So how would you incorporate this in a program, right? Now you're working with this right now, so you have kind of a sense of it. And I think a lot of people would be surprised at the amount of resistance training that's going to make up their, their goals to lose fat, their fat loss program. So I would say within a fat loss program, 70% of that program should be devoted to strength training time, right? So within that, so 70% of the time should be devoted to strength training. About 30% of that should be devoted to HIIT cardio, right? So we'll talk about what HIIT is versus steady state in a moment, but does that number surprise you?
Not at this stage in my life and with the plan you've put in place for me and the things we've worked on the past few months. It would have surprised me when I was young. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. And I think most people that aren't as informed as you would be surprised, but we have this visual right here. This pyramid's great, right? So diet we know is extremely important because that's our best way to control calorie intake or to control calories in total. Then sleep, actually, for several reasons, then strength training, then some HIIT, some intervals. And then at the top, they put jogging if you want to. But that's kind of how I feel about it. If you enjoy running and you're a runner, that's your sport, by all means. It's a different story. But if you're trying to burn off calories, that's not the way to go. So 70% of your training time should be spent with strength training, 30% with HIIT, which is intervals of sprinting and recovering, And then the other thing that people often get wrong, you got to move around. You can't just go train for an hour and then sit all day, right? So we have to move around for our biological adaptation for movement. So making sure we're getting in those, 10,000 steps is a general goal that a lot of people should have as well. So making sure that we're shooting for that. Beyond that, outside of the training side, it comes down to what we know: diet, making sure that we're getting adequate protein to protect that muscle and keep ourselves full. And then the one that everybody always forgets, for whether they're gaining muscle, losing fat, or trying to perform on the field: sleep, right? That's what's going to regulate our hormones, help us recover. That allows a lot of the metabolic process for either muscle growth or fat loss to take place, right? So do you feel like you kind of are adhering to these points, these 6 points throughout your program currently?
Yes, obviously there's obstacles that get in the way, especially with rest. We can only do best practices and try as we can, do everything we can to exercise, good sleep hygiene. Obviously, on any given night, like the stars may not align, but the priority queue, absolutely. I know since I've been working with you, not in terms of time, but remember I used to put my cardio first and then go into my weightlifting. And I'm much happier, having switched those. And it's much more in line with this pyramid. I put the bulk of my energy and focus, especially on this week, which has been like wonderfully hard, to put my focus and energy there and then clean up, put in some cardio afterwards.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that for you is your system now. But for a lot of people, I think that would be revolutionary, to prioritize the things in that order. They've always seen it, or they're just assuming based on what they've seen or what they've been told in the past. But yeah, it's interesting that it's the things we pay the most attention to that are the least effective sometimes for what we actually want. So it's the difference between like knowing and believing something. So I think it's important to dispel those. So a typical weight training session, right? Like our typical training session. So what if you were to go to the gym, prior to the experience you have now, to lose body fat, how would you have trained?
Try to do a body weight split, but I was putting my cardio first, and it was really steady state. This is the first time I've gotten back into any interval training in 10 years. So let's just say, like, before we started working together, would have been lower energy workouts, starting with like 25 minutes of pretty simple, basic, flat cardio, maybe some light intervals on like the elliptical, and then going into kind of a disorganized, not totally thought out weight training program. I did do body part splits, but then often wouldn't hit the 5-day mark of my ideal split. So then I was like skipping things. It wasn't thought out. Right?
So yeah, I mean, a little bit too much cardio, not adhering to a strict structure kind of thing. Well, I think that was actually, you were light years ahead of a lot of people. I think most people would just go in and, spend an hour on the treadmill and then do a few bicep curls.
Oh.
Right. And just hit it from there. So, this is how you already know, but I would go in there is, for a fat loss workout, start with weight training, right? So moderate to heavy weight training for the majority of it, right? So like most people think like, where's all the cardio in here? But we're starting off with squats, we're doing shoulder press, pull-ups, big compound exercises that are going to lead to a lot of muscle recruitment, and then finishing with bike sprints with my awesome typo right here, and then recovery and mobility work at the end. So it's not dissimilar from how you might do a powerlifting or a hypertrophy cycle. The volume and the intensity might be reduced, right? The amount of sets and then the weights that are used, but largely the movements are going to be the same. The priority within the workout to spend time lifting weights as opposed to doing some type of cardio or conditioning will be the same as well. So, most of the time conditioning should not exceed 20 or 25% of the total session, regardless of the goal being fat loss or anything like that. Right. How do you like training? Your workouts are similar to this. How do you feel this has been beneficial to train in this way?
I feel like it hasn't compromised my cardio at all, but putting weightlifting, putting compounds, putting all that first lets me focus lets me put the energy I have on any given day into the weight training first. And then usually I still have something in the tank to at least try some like interval cardio, but I feel much improved and much more efficient focusing on the weight training first and then focusing on the 25 minutes I set aside for cardio. And I'll say, like, part of the reason, I'm doing cardio is for general heart health, but I've learned cardio is not going to be the main way I am dropping body fat like week to week. It's just,
Yeah, and that's a great point too. I think to differentiate between, like, I'm totally on board for that, right? Like, we need cardiorespiratory health markers. We need those to be elevated, and we need to make sure that we're doing aerobic activity throughout our week to make sure to maintain those levels. That's completely far and separate from people using it for fat loss, right? Like, I think
Right.
people should get their heart rate up and raise it for periods of time throughout the week. Usually 20 to 30-minute sessions is sufficient, but not to use it as a tool for weight loss necessarily. Like
and,
that.
and,
Just
and
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, and let me add, like, especially with the programs you have and what you're able to help people get set up with, I can be weight training and breathing heavy, pouring sweat, having a cardio experience. You gave me leg routine on Monday, a barbell like superset with like 3 exercises back to back, what a Cossack, a reverse lunge, and a squat. And like, breathing heavy, pouring sweat, needed to take a break. I mean, it's not, like, it certainly feels like intense cardio or when the body through it. Like,
Oh yeah. I mean, it's much different. And also you're getting sort of that like increased heart stroke volume,
Yep.
the amount the heart's able to press. So it's two different things, the frequency and then the stroke volume from that, the increased pressure, the weightlifting as well. So in a way it's better. There's 2 ways to improve your cardiorespiratory health, like whether that's the steady state or that sort of increased pressure from the weightlifting. So both are beneficial. Yeah. So I guess, like, the main takeaways would be that, we need to make sure that we're incorporating majority weight training when we are going for fat loss, because of the maintenance of muscle, also the metabolic effect of having more muscle, and the fact that our hormones are going to be better regulated as we lose weight if we're spending time weight training and resting sufficiently. This all provided with the caveat that well, that your diet is in accordance with your goals, that you're sticking to a balanced diet, you're eating enough protein, and you're eating a sufficient calorie deficit to lose weight. What do you think are the big takeaways for you?
I mean, understanding where to prioritize my time, and understanding it, depending on your goals, it's more time efficient. You specialize in working with busy professionals to focus on the weight training first versus those like hours of empty, flat, cardio, like what you'll get a better, result from. And so,
yeah, especially if you only have 30 minutes in the gym, it's better to go through your weightlifting circuit than jump on the treadmill for 30 minutes and just crank it out like that, in my opinion, my experience working with clients as well. So I think that's important. Like, when you're busy, what should you prioritize? And in my opinion, it should be the weightlifting for the innumerable reasons we covered. Like
yes,
that.
yeah, like I could see a time when I'm busier because right now I'm adding cardio after every lifting session, but if I get too busy, it's not gonna be the lifting I cut into. Maybe I do cardio 3 times a week, or whenever possible. But having that lifting, locked in, and I've certainly lived the, I think, benefit of when I've had a little more muscle mass, feeling like a active burning metabolism is going like all the time, like furnace type effect in a good way, knowing you're burning through the calories you're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, the big takeaway is, hey, like, the more muscle you have, the more expensive you are around the clock, as opposed to just getting on the cardio machine and the time you're able to use then as well. So you sitting here right now, because of the muscle you have, is beneficial to your